started with their last talk tonight, and it's going to be about designing urban pollinator gardens. I say beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Now, what looks beautiful to a sophisticated gardener, perhaps like April, it may look a little too natural and messy to a neighbor. And so, here to provide us with some tips on having a pollinator garden that is both functional and beautiful is April Johnson. April's the NDSU Extension Pollinator Program Coordinator. She has a master's degree in natural resource management from North Dakota State University. She's a master gardener and she serves as the vice president of the Fargo Garden Society. April, welcome to the forums.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm
Sure.
excited to be here. Um, some of you might remember me or heard me talk before as the extension pollinator technician. And because of a series of red tape as far as how funding is distributed at NDSU, in order to give me a raise, we had to change my job title. So anyway, I still pretty much do the same job. Quick non-discrimination statement before we get started. I have to show this with all my talks legally. What is an extension pollinator program coordinator? So as I was saying, it used to be the NDSU extension pollinator technician. And my job is still pretty much the same. I do a little bit more writing now, a little less public speaking, but basically, my job consists mainly of publishing educational materials that support pollinator conservation. My job, like a lot of our extension personnel, is to read the science read those scientific journal papers and repackage it up so where it's efficient and is easy to use for the general public. Um, why are we talking about the how to make your pollinator garden look nice to your neighbors? There's a couple points we're gonna do. Let me see. Yeah, we'll just do the presentation overview. Talk about challenges for pollinators in North Dakota cities, very brief. How our Extension Master Gardener program addresses those challenges, introductions to the FAME method, and more on that when we get about a third of the way through. And we might talk about some next steps for our program because I always like to give a shout out to what my team is working on. And then we'll have Q&A, of course. So this is what is a pollinator conservation garden? So you can go ahead and read that slide. Quick facts about pollinators and conservation gardens. You probably know everything there is to know about pollinators and pollination 101. If you've heard any of my talks, I pretty much give the same spiel in the beginning just so we're all on the same page. Pollinators are living vectors that aid in the pollination of plants. Some plants are wind pollinated, some are water they spread their genetic material in the water, but most of the plants are pollinated by insects and other animals. So the primary goal of a pollinator conservation garden is to provide a habitat that encourages pollinators to visit, forage for nectar and pollen, and contribute to the pollination of flowering plants. But why do we care about that? Pollinators are essential for the reproduction of many flowering plants and over 75% of the world's crops, including fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds. Pollinator habitat is diminishing across the globe due to multiple factors such as climate change, herbicides, agriculture, and urban expansion. Our extension master gardeners and all of you who are interested in pollinator gardening have the opportunity to help restore some of the native land that has been converted out of pollinator habitat. Um, we are trying to bridge those remaining wild spaces and creating prime pollinator habitat in urban areas. What challenges do urban pollinator gardens face? Unlike a native prairie or a cultivated garden, a monoculture lawn provides zero foraging resources to pollinating insects. And for a lot of us in urban settings, a large percentage of our properties is that lawn. Some members of the public may not be familiar with wild spaces, so that's kind of a challenge too. Your neighbors might just expect to see only the cultivated non-native gardens in their neighborhood. Neighborhood and city ordinances also can dictate the use of private and public spaces and may restrict opportunities for pollinator gardens. So there's quite a bit going on that some challenges that the pollinators face and the ones that we face in trying to help them out. This is not a picture of a house in Fargo. The roof obviously is way too flat for how much snow we typically get here, but it's a really good example of a lot of the similar pollinator challenges that we see in the typical landscaping in our city. So we got rock mulch. I see that a lot. Near zero pollinator foraging, drought vulnerable plants, and weed pressure. This, in contrast, is what native North Dakota prairie looks like. It's a mix of grasses and forbs, drought-tolerant plants, a lot of wetlands, and diverse plant life. So tallgrass prairie can include more than 200 plant species. That is a stat from the North Dakota Game and Fish. And then over 400 plant species were recorded in Theodore Roosevelt National Park, possibly as many as 500. So in contrast, with the picture on the previous slide, native habitat, what the pollinators are used to, what they expect, where they thrive, that is vibrant and diverse. Looks a lot different than a monoculture lawn. What are we doing to address those challenges? When I say we, I mean NDSU Extension, everyone involved in the pollinator conservation. We provide educational programming on essential habitat for pollinators in urban spaces. That's the bulk of my job. We also certify gardens that meet the criteria of prime pollinator habitat in urban and rural settings. You can see there's a sign in this picture. We have certified over 240 public and private gardens in Minnesota, Montana, North Dakota, and South Dakota since the program began in 2016. And last year, we partnered with Fargo Parks in certifying about 50 acres of new pollinator habitat. Our Bee Lawn initiative, which we started 2 years ago, distributes white Dutch clover seeds for about 100 square foot patches. Each year of the initiative, we provide seeds for 60,000 square feet of bee lawn. So that's a pretty big deal. So why FAME? I mentioned FAME, and it's all capitalized because it's an acronym. I mentioned that early on in the presentation overview. I will tell you the definition in 2 slides from now, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of context. Audience feedback inspired the FAME method. At my public talks on pollinator gardening, I was getting consistent questions about 2 main issues. One would be someone in the community or your neighborhood had decided to market their unmowed lawn as pollinator habitat. If you recall from a few slides ago, I mentioned the monoculture lawn doesn't provide any forage for pollinators. So an unmowed lawn does not count as pollinator gardening. And then the number two, the second issue that I heard a lot was someone in the community had installed a pollinator garden which fit the criteria of prime habitat, but received criticism about the aesthetic. So this picture is actually a professor at NDSU put in a pollinator garden, and there was, you might have heard, there was a lot of, what is the word I want to commotion is the word coming to mind, but that's not the word I want to use. But it was in the paper. There was some backlash from his neighbors who didn't know what the space was for. Anyway, so the FAME method came out of that feedback. Um, I wanted to create a something simple to give to the community that helps to fulfill the specific needs of pollinators in a way that addresses those 2 challenges. Either, like it's not actually pollinator habitat, needs to have certain criteria, or it is the right criteria, but it is distracting to neighbors or something like that. So I drew on my background in art and design. That was my previous occupation before I switched to the sciences. I had a decade-long career in graphic design. I drew on my background in that to integrate principles of design into the FAME method, making it simple for gardeners to create beautiful pollinator gardens, even without design experience. Um, without getting on a soapbox about how creativity is just a set of rules that you can apply and anybody can access them, um, I would get questions about how do I make something look like this wild look nice. And so we're talking about the FAME method. FAME, like I said, is an acronym for frame, accessorize, maintain, and educate. And it's just a very simple, your basic landscaping design 101 that we're going to apply to pollinator gardening to make it cute. And anyway, yeah, cute. Frame. The frame is your hardscape, your hardscapes in the garden or other features that designate boundaries. A frame communicates intention. It tells the viewer that the garden is there on purpose. The structure that comes from borders can support a lot of internal chaos. Something that looks more natural and organic can function in an urban setting if it's got a frame around it. The frame is kind of like your kitchen junk drawer. Um, I think we all probably still have one of those in our kitchens where if all of the contents of that drawer were just on the counter, it looks like an unorganized, chaotic mess. But you slide it all into the drawer and it's tidy. Here's some examples. When I say hardscapes, we know I'm talking about paths and pavement, but there's also some structural elements here that can work as borders. You've got an arbor, border, path, trellis, and a hedge. Um, and as a bonus, vertical gardening on the trellis and the arbor expands the growing zones. Case studies. Quick note, I've got 4 slides of case studies, and all of these were taken from our North Dakota, or sorry, NDSU Extension Pollinator Resources Master Gardener page. The URL is too long to repeat right now, but these are pictures submitted from our um, mostly from master gardeners, but anyone who has a certified pollinator garden gets put on the map and can submit photos if they choose. So shout out if you recognize, if any of you are master gardeners or have a pollinator garden and these are your pictures. Thank you so much for continuing to submit those. I was really bad about, I didn't think about writing down the links or the counties that submitted these pictures before I put them in the slideshow. Wish I could go back in time, but thank you so much if you see one of your pictures. I'm so grateful for your participation. Okay, case studies. This is the paths and pavements and the border. So this is just really great examples of putting your pollinator garden somewhere where it's got a frame, it stays contained, and it looks like it's supposed to be there. Then you have lots of different options. You can tuck it right up against your sidewalk or your driveway, maybe your, yeah, beautiful brick pathway. And then we've got pictures in the bottom. I circled them in red because when I get pictures submitted for the pollinator garden map, it's a lot of focus on, and rightly so, on the blooms, the plants themselves. So we've just got tiny little corner bits of some nice rock edging and some landscape brick edging. A is accessorize, add visual interest. Focal points add dimension to the landscape and provide habitat for a variety of pollinators, from ground dwellers to canopy dwellers. And I will expand on that in or maybe I didn't. I will expand on that, even if there's not a slide coming up for that. Pollinators use trees and shrubs for shelter at night during inclement weather and for rest during migration periods, like the monarch butterfly, for instance. Oaks and willows are keystone species in our region as they support hundreds of beneficial insects and pollinators. Pollinators overwinter in stalks and tall grasses. So by increasing these accessories, the focal point, so like a big, tall, beautiful ornamental grass is great, works as a focal point. Any tree or shrub, and there's plenty of trees and shrubs that are excellent pollinator resources. Those can add a really great structural element to the garden. They also help, if it's a tree, for instance, it can help designate the space if you're planting all around the tree. And then, of course, they provide shelter for our pollinators. Art as accessories. Even though the pollinator garden, where our goal is to kind of mimic nature, which is very wild and doesn't typically contain art or sculptures, we can still add a human touch. These like at the end of the day, these are our gardens. This is our creative space. We get to make it what we want. Incorporating artistic elements adds that visual interest and emphasizes to the viewer that the pollinator space is supposed to be there. It's purposeful, well maintained. Art and accessories can serve as shelter as well, um, and provide water in a space without an endemic source. So when I say art and accessories, um, can serve as shelter. Yeah, so you can, I'll talk about shelter on the next slide, but um, a beautiful bird bath, for instance, or some sort of dish with rocks in it with water can be, I mean, you can get as creative as you want with that, but it provides water, which is a key criteria for the pollinator space, and also can be a beautiful bowl or ceramic dish or something like that. So you can get creative as you want. Shelters accessories. This is the one I really love. Even though um, we really want to focus on providing blooms, flowers in our pollinator garden, shelter is something that seems to be undervalued and underutilized. And I don't think you need to be limited to just a bee house. I do have a note about bee houses. I love them as an educational tool to kind of introduce kids, especially to pollinator conservation, bee houses. There's a lot of different designs that you can very easily create yourself out of simple materials. And that kids always love activities, so that's something fun to do. They just need to be, they have a kind of a high maintenance requirement. They always need to be cleaned out every season in the spring after the bees have left, because otherwise you're basically building a hotel, letting it get dirty with your first round of tenants, and then expecting new customers to want to sleep, to want to spend time in dirty hotel rooms that weren't clean. So I just think about it like that. Feature wood, driftwood, logs, a living fence. That's what these bound up twigs are, a living fence. They support lots of different critters, not just pollinators, but other beneficial insects as well. And then your grasses and shrubs, depending on the species that you pick, can work as winter interest as well as provide um, shelter for pollinators for overwintering. Case studies, real quick. We've got examples of a beautiful water feature, a pond. I love ponds if you can swing it. They attract a lot of biodiversity to the garden. A lot of great pest control insects are drawn there, dragonflies, frogs, toads, that kind of thing. I know it gets complicated with mosquitoes. I don't have anything to say about that. I'm not the expert about different chemicals used for mosquitoes and managing your pond. But anyway, but if you already know that and you can put in a pond, definitely try that. The bottom left picture is a shot of a bee water or a bee or butterfly water. And the key there that I want you to note is the stones in the water. That is absolutely essential for breaking the water tension. There are so many bees that are teeny tiny that they're so small we don't even know they're bees. We think they're fruit flies. And they can very easily get trapped in water tension and drown. So you need to be breaking that up, give the insects a place to land so they can get their water without getting trapped. We don't want to create a biological hazard in our garden. Our pollinator gardens are supposed to help them thrive, not trap them and drown them. Um, Another great accessory to use, well, there's a bee house down there in the bottom right, and I don't know why I'm pointing with my hands. You can't see my hands, but I am pointing and gesturing because I need to speak with my hands. There is some great looking furniture in these gardens as well, or in those two gardens as well, and they work to both invite people into the space and again tell the viewer that, yeah, I did this on purpose. This is supposed to be here. Maintain, M. You have to determine the level of care. This is up to you. The easiest way to appeal to viewer perspective is to just choose a maintenance plan that gives the pollinator garden as much attention and care as the rest of your garden. Make it consistent, make it look seamless with other sections of the garden. It just tells the viewer that you are taking care of the space, um, and that you have a plan. A garden which mimics nature will not have the same look. Obviously, we saw a slide earlier on that showed a picture of native prairie. It won't have the same look as your typical flower or vegetable garden, but it can have the same level of visual appeal. As pollinator garden designers, we are looking for that sweet spot in the range between that wild, utter neglect that you see in nature and the pristinely cultivated. Neither of those two extremes are what we want for the space, but somewhere in the middle. And wherever that lands in the middle is totally up to you. Educate. This is the last part of fame. Make it interactive. So subtly or overtly solicit viewer participation. This will encourage community and cultural investment in the space. Make it not just your pollinator garden, but your neighborhood's pollinator garden. And there's lots of ways to do that. Um, the viewer is more receptive to pollinator spaces designed as conservation habitats via that visual communication. So a sign or QR code indicates the purpose of the garden and it encourages people to interact with it. If it's a sign, you're getting your viewer to read the sign. If it's got a QR code, you're encouraging them to follow that, and it can link to lots of different options. It could be a list of all of the species that you have in your garden. It could be the sign up page for the Master Gardener program. It could be just the application process for getting their own garden certified. There's lots of different options there. The Our Extension Master Gardener program offers these free garden signs to anyone who has a pollinator garden and goes through the effort of filling out the application. You can email me questions if you have questions about that. I have a whole nother presentation about the criteria. It is um, it is very well thought out. It has specific requirements, but it is not overwhelming. It is something that anybody could do. Some other examples of making your garden, your pollinator garden interactive are plant labels. I love plant labels. I clocked in Esther's one of her last pictures on her presentation of the daylily garden. You could see a bunch of lovely plant labels in the background. I'll show you a picture of what I'm talking about, but I use them on my property too. And because I find it very frustrating to find walk by somebody's beautiful garden in it's in another neighborhood, and they've got a plant that I don't know what it is, and I need to know. I'm sure that some of you are like that too. So anyway, I love plant labels. And then also you can share the space. If you're trying to create a culture where your neighborhood has kind of some symbolic ownership, obviously it's your property if it's a a private pollinator garden. But if you want them to feel like it's their, like they kind of have some investment in it, you host a workshop or just a tour or just a talk in your pollinator garden. Show people around, show them the different plants, let them observe the bees. Um, yeah, just make it interactive and educate the viewers on the purpose and the function of the garden. Some case studies. Okay, the plant labels, that's what I'm talking about in the top right. They're so cute. I love them so much. These might even have the scientific names on them too. Well, they can't see that's too small, but beautiful pollinator garden signs. I love the big wooden post that the top left picture is posted on, and it has a pollinator habitat explanation underneath it. That's super great. And then of course I think that's like a historical marker in the bottom right, but I just included it because it is a pollinator garden. And just you can get as elaborate as you want with your signs, with how much information you want to communicate. Key points, takeaways from this talk. Pollinator gardens make a difference in protecting at-risk species. You might be thinking, April, a little 10 by 10 square foot pollinator garden or smaller than that is not going to make a difference. And that is incorrect. I live in a neighborhood where for some reason there just aren't a lot of flowers. So literally every bee in the neighborhood is at my house. I wish that my neighbors had more resources in their yards and landscaping for the bees. Although at this point I would be kind of jealous because I feel like they're my babies, and if they go visit someone else's house, I'd be a little offended. Um, but they make a huge difference. If you plant it they will come. Anyway, use the FAME method as a simple framework to making a functional and beautiful pollinator space. Just stick to those 4 guidelines as your very basic foundation for making it look nice and tidy and welcoming and purposeful. Very simple. These methods will work, and they're pretty easy to implement. And then I always encourage everyone to apply for certification. If you've got some sort of pollinator garden, or if you can incorporate pollinator plants in your existing garden, apply for that free sign and put it up in your garden. It helps us both measure how much pollinator space that we have encouraged the community to install since we began our program, and it gives us quantifiable data to present to our grant funding People who give grants like to know, like to measure very specifically how much impact that we made with the money that they gave us. So, quick shout out projects for 2025. This is what we're working on in the pollinator conservation sphere. We are trying to get NDSU certified as a bee campus. That's pretty exciting. It's getting everybody on campus involved. If we have representation from faculty, staff, students, maintenance, extension, of course. New publications. There's one coming out on bee lawns pretty soon. And then this year, 2025, we will publish pollinator gardens and city ordinances. That is about how to know, like, look for your ordinances, look for, know what you can and can't do on your public or private property for pollinator gardens. Every town is different, so it's more of a like how to navigate, how to find the rules and how to navigate them. Participation in National Pollinator Week. We do that every summer. We do fun events every single day for about 5 days. Podcast episodes and pollinator conservation on social media and new website. Speaking of social media, boom. We are also now on Instagram. It took me forever to get us there. I don't know why I was dragging my feet, but we are on Instagram now. I'm sure some of you probably already follow us on Facebook, but if you are on Facebook and not on Instagram, make sure you change that. And then contact me, apriljohnson.1@ndsu.edu. That's my email. I love chatting about anything pollinator related or plant related. I love plants. I'm happy to answer any of your questions, especially if you're shy and don't want to put it in the chat, just send me an email.
Okay, we're open to some questions. April, towards the end there, you did mention about 8 by 10 gardens. How about is there a minimum size that's needed for a pollinator garden?
No, there's not a minimum size. There's not a maximum size either. For certification, you'll just need to know an approximate size because one of the first questions on that application is about how big is your garden because we like to have those numbers to add to our 200. Well, I think we have the last count I got, last accurate count was about 240 million square feet of pollinator garden space. So we just l lump that into the total. Um, but you do have requirements for how many plants. You need two plant species for each blooming period, and there are four blooming periods. So that's 8 plants total that you'll need to have in your garden. So depending on how big they get and how much space they require, I guess that will definitely inform your pollinator garden space.
Okay, how about is there a list of plants available that would be recommended for pollinator plants?
Yes. Oh, wish I had. I wish I had listed that on the pollinator or on the QR codes. But anyway, yes, the answer is there's a publication of which Esther is the primary author, I believe, and it is called Beautiful Landscapes. And it is on, so if you just, search NDSU Beautiful Landscapes, it will take you to the landing page, the HTML version of that pub, but there's also, you can click on a link there to download the PDF, and it has it's an incredible resource. It's quite a large document as far as extension publications go. It's got several um, lists of plants categorized kind of by type. So it's got some trees and shrubs. It has herbs, flowers, and vegetables, and then a huge list of perennial plants. And they are organized by bloom time. So that makes it really easy to, if you're starting from scratch, designing your pollinator garden, to just go pick and choose from that list. I mean, it's definitely helpful for filling in some of those missing bloom times as well.
And just comment that publication is listed at the Spring Fever website under April's presentation as one of the handouts. So if you want, you can find it right there.
Oh, great. I forgot I did
Yep,
that. Thank you, Tom.
sure. How about and you can have a pollinator garden just using containers.
That is,
Hmm.
hmm,
Or how about
I'm not a,
apartments? If I have an apartment, can I have a pollinator garden?
well, okay. My answer is complicated. So, pollinator gardens are really they consist mainly of perennial forbs and grasses. So, I guess the question is partially like, are there perennial shrubs and grasses that will come back if they're put in a container and overwintered on like an apartment patio? That's not a question I can answer. Maybe Don or Esther could. Um, and then, but my other, so as far as getting certified pollinator garden on a like apartment balcony, that is tricky. I would have to think about that. Somebody send me if that's something you're really interested in, we can brainstorm solutions together. Send me an email. My other point would be bees, a lot, especially a lot of the native bees in our area, really are drawn to herbs and other annual flowers that, sorry, herbs when you let them flower. So let's say you're growing a lot of basil like I do, or mint. Harvest half the plant consistently and let the other plant bloom. And it will be swarmed with bees. So that's something I usually recommend for smaller or container gardens is do a lot of herbs.
Okay, this person has a pollinator garden, but it's kind of gotten out of control and it's become full of weeds. Do you have any solutions? This person prefers not to use chemical herbicides.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, some of the criteria, sorry, the last bit of criteria for the application process is a pledge to use, quote, safe pesticide practices. And it's really just using a lot less or none. So, if the question is how to eradicate the weeds without using chemicals, it really depends on the weed. And I do a lot of hand digging certain weeds in my garden. Overrun by weeds. You can also try planting more of your pollinator plants to take up that space and choke out the weeds. But I guess my answer is it really depends on the species of weeds we're talking about. And I'm also not an expert on all of the ways to handle specific weeds. But that's something you can email me about, and I would love to research that for you.
So you have to find out if it's a perennial or annual weed, for
Yeah.
example. Is it a
Yes.
grass or a broadleaf? But can we use a touch of a spot spray of a chemical herbicide to, let's say there's some quack grass in there. Can I use a little shot of glyphosate on that to control that?
Yeah, I think that would be fine. Yes, spot spraying or I've met some people who will get down there with like a brush and brush it on some of their weeds just to be careful. Yeah.
Okay. How about, can you talk a little bit about bee lawns? What is a bee lawn and what's the feature of a bee lawn and how can they get bee lawn seed?
Okay. So bee lawns, if we pan out away from just North Dakota and specifically like the cold frozen tundra, northern plains. Bee lawns are basically a mix of grasses and forbs, low growing, flowering plants mixed into your lawn that provide nectar and pollen foraging for bees and butterflies. What we have found, or what the science is telling us in our area, the hardest and easiest is putting the white Dutch clover seeds, using that as bee lawn. I think we've done some trials on like self heal or vetch. I know that M Minnesota the big Minnesota school, but I can't think of their name, but they have a pretty robust pollinator program too, and they've done some trials. If I think of that, I will share that resource. But anyway, moving on to back to the bee lawn question. We're looking for plants that flower to mix in with our yard or our grasses, that can bloom when they're short. That's why the clover works really well. I mean, it does also provide really nutritious nectar and pollen, but it's maintained really low. It will grow like about 4 inches tall and then bloom, and then you can mow it, and it keeps coming back. It's a perennial plant. Um, there's different methods of incorporating a bee lawn. You can choose to plant strictly just clover, like if you just decide to take out a patch of your turf, you can just seed it completely with clover, or you can what is the word? I'm missing the word, but you can overseed an existing lawn with clover. And the word I'm looking for has to do with prepping the site. You wouldn't certainly not in my yard, I wouldn't just throw clover seed down because my thatch is so thick. It's like an inch and a half thick in my yard. I don't know that clover would take unless there was visibly bare soil there. Um, so there's some preparation methods to go with that. I might be rambling too much. I really love bee lawns. I could talk about them for a long time. And Esther is coming out with a really in-depth publication on bee lawns.
Okay, so maybe it's a good time to mention that we've had spring fever garden forums for many years. All our presentations are posted on the spring fever website, and a lot of these questions that people have about certification, April covered in her presentation last year. And also Esther talked about bee lawns in the past. So you can download those old presentations and get the guts of to answer your question there. So we just got a couple minutes here. So some quick answers here, April. How about, does liquid fence, the repellent, deter pollinators?
I have never been asked that question. It deters humans. Um, sorry, that's just a joke. I've used that product only once, and I couldn't do it again. Um, I do not think so. Although with any chemicals that I would use in or around the pollinator garden, it's really important to not put them out when bees are foraging. So, you'll want to apply any chemicals you apply in the garden that could be that could pose any risk to pollinators at all, or if you're questioning it, try to apply them in the evening after pollinators have gone to rest. After they've gone to their shelters and they're no longer actively visiting flowers, that's when you can apply different chemicals to your garden just to be safe. Yeah.
So liquid fence contains like garlic, rotten eggs, and cinnamon. So I don't think any of those are particularly harmful to bees. How about, is a honey locust tree a pollinating plant that favors pollinators?
Yes.
Okay. How about, you mentioned about having like some water, providing water sources for pollinators. Do you just use tap water, or is it better to use mineral water or add minerals to the water?
Oh, huh. Um, I have not been asked that question. Hmm, I guess I don't have in front of me the difference in what is in the tap water versus what comes out of the hose. I
Okay.
want to say it's probably fine because I am a human who drinks tap water, and if it's safe for me to drink, it's safe for the bees. So either one is fine. I don't
Okay.
know that one is better.
Yeah, I don't know about the minerals. I know that sometimes, like for butterflies, we have those, we make all these little muddy patches where they
Hmm.
gather their minerals from within the soil itself. That can be used to, and that the men, the male butterflies especially appreciate that. How about one last question? You talk about removing spent vegetation when temperatures reach 50 degrees. So are you talking about when temperatures reach 50 degrees in fall or spring?
Oh, that would be in spring. So that must have been on the slide with shelter. So one of the easy ways to provide shelter in your pollinator garden is to leave your stalks and grasses to just chill and sit there over the winter. A lot of bees will nest under those grasses, especially if they're folded over under snow or something. So in the spring, the earliest bees, sorry, yeah, the earliest the bees will come out in our area is maybe late April, and that'll be bumblebees because they're larger, more robust, and can handle flying in lower lights and lower temperatures than your honeybees or other native bees. So if if you think maybe you might have a bee sheltering in your spent vegetation that you left in the fall. I know that we all get pretty excited as soon as the sun comes out, I want to get out in my garden and clean stuff up. But I'm very disciplined in that I leave anything that could possibly be sheltering a pollinator until it's about 55 degrees at night. So if you think, okay, it's warm enough that I trust putting out a tomato seedling outside, then it's warm enough to clean up your garden, your pollinator garden, because by that time it's warm enough that all of the bee species in our area are able to be flying about and foraging and have left those sheltering spots.
Okay, that's helpful. Now, a couple quick questions. If I live outside of North Dakota, can I be certified in your program?
Yes. Montana, Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota are where
Okay.
the, yeah. So if you live there, you can be certified. Yep.
And did you say that you can provide seeds for bee lawns to gardeners?
Yes.
So they
Um,
should contact you for that
yes.
information.
Yes, that would be the easiest way. Yep. And especially if you have access to a county extension office, I can package up a large quantity, send it to that county office, and you can pick them up there too.
How about one last question? Sometimes people have solar lighting in their garden. And so does solar lights in the garden at night deter pollinators? Does it affect pollinators?
It would only affect moths, probably. We all know that moths love light. Moths are the ones that are going to be working in your pollinator garden at night. But also, moths are attracted to a lot of white flowers. So it kind of depends. They may not even be that attracted to your garden at all. Um, but yes, light pollution can disrupt diurnal cycles, can be confusing, can attract them away from the flowers. But they're not, your solar lighting in your garden is not going to be brighter than the street lamp on the corner of your block. So uh, in panning out, stepping back, I don't consider solar lighting in the garden to be a problem. Maybe a massive floodlight on the back of your house that could disrupt the pollinators in the garden, but probably not. I don't think your solar lighting is going to be a huge detraction.
And Dan Canota will be speaking about night flying moths in a few weeks to our group.
Ooh,
Okay, thanks,
exciting.
April. That was outstanding. We really appreciate your presentation. And let's just thank all our speakers tonight, Don, Esther, and April. Thanks for getting us off to such a great start. And we're just getting started in Spring Fever 2025. Next week, we're going to talk about selecting super shrubs, how to maintain your lawnmower, and how to grow cucumbers in North Dakota. So please join us for that. Tell your friends about the forums. Everybody's welcome. The more, the merrier. And two quick announcements here. One is all our sessions are recorded. They're all recorded. And Scott and Sonia, they will post tonight's presentations on the Spring Fever website within a couple days. So you can look for it there in case you want to rewatch it or you missed some of the presentations. Go to the Spring Fever website and it's right there for you. And then also at the website, we also have all the handouts for the presentation. So you can download the handouts. So there you go. Thank you, everybody. Everybody have a good night, and we hope to see you next week.